So we have a little bit of time left, which we're going to dive into the depths of our DM question of the week, which is how DMs can deal with large parties.
Yes, it is how to DM large parties.
Exactly.
So last episode, we talked about a DMing one player. And so like we said last time, when you change up the numbers, the game really changes with it. So a game is typically supposed to be like 3 to 5. And just like having 1 or 2 is different, having above 3 to 5, so 6 or 7, is going to be a much different game. So what we're going to talk about right now is kind of how the game changes and how you as the DM should be changing with it. Is there anything would you like to start?
Well, for all those DMs out there, D&D does have a cap to its players. I believe it's 7 players, but don't expect Dungeons and Dragons to be fun if you have 10 people. Just as a warning, don't put everyone in your campaign. It's
for the most part. I'm sure there's exceptions, but yes,
there's exceptions, but it's very very difficult to DM very large numbers like that. When I say difficult, it's very difficult. One thing that's against you when you have a large group of people is time.
Yep, that's a big one.
Yeah, you literally have to get through everyone's choices, everyone's combat, and stuff like that. So
let's talk about time. So when you're dealing with one player, it goes really fast because there's no talking, blah blah blah. The opposite is true for large parties. The game is going to move slower. And depending on how many players you have, it's more or less slower. So the more players, the more slower it's going to go. So what we should talk about right now is how, as a DM, you can deal with this slowness. And maybe just kind of, and to some degree, you're just going to have to be, you just have to accept that it's going to be slow and a little less constantly moving, which is okay. But when you have players that are instead of having people arguing, you're going to have multiple teams arguing, and then those teams arguing with other teams, and people are going to start grouping up and talking and blah blah blah. So you're going to have a lot of talking. So with large parties, the first thing you need to think about is what strategies you have to speed up the game. And any that you have, you need to use. Or at least you probably should. And this will actually be its own topic, I think, on this podcast. So we will not get too much into it. But some quick ones to throw out.
Be strict. If someone's blabbering on what they're going to do, you're all right, you got 5 seconds, do your turn.
Yeah, in combat, 5-second rule. It's a very general rule. It's good to go. Put your hand up, count down to 1. And if they don't know what they're doing, neither does their character. And of course, why would their character know? If you as a player sitting at a table are too distracted by the combat to know what you're doing, then the character in the middle of this actual life-threatening situation will be totally stunned. So say, all right, you take your turn to think about what you're going to do, or you take your turn because you're so scared or stunned that your mind goes blank. Next player. And you have to be strict with this. Another quick idea is to use initiative order outside of combat. This is one I like a ton, where basically you're just always asking, okay, what do you do? Okay, pause. What do you do? Okay, pause. And do that all the time. And I think that's good for small parties and big parties, but especially good for big parties because you can really let people kind of fall through the cracks in big parties. A shy person in a big party will never get to do anything, guaranteed. So doing that will definitely speed things along and just help people get to play. And then the last quick one I want to throw out is because things are going to move slower and you're going to be making people do things in 5 seconds and constantly be going as fast as you can, you need to have your prep ready for you to go faster because you are going to be putting in a lot more effort to go fast. So you should summarize or simplify your prep on a cheat sheet. That's what I would recommend. And because there's just no time for you not to know what's happening next. If your players do something, you need to know right away. You shouldn't be let me just roll these dice, let me check something. No, there's no time for this because it's already a slow game, so you got to keep it moving. So those are just kind of some quick ones, but in general, any strategies you have to make it go faster, use. Okay. Time. What else?
Well, I kind of made this just generally the gist of it. the game needs to go fast. So everything that he says is, valid. You need to do everything in your DM power to go as fast as you can. Because it's going to go longer than it seems. Because I've done a giant group like that. He has 2. And it's very difficult for the DM. It's like, you have to do time. 5-second rule, you have to.
The basic mistake, the very classic mistake, and I have absolutely made it, is you have a big group of people, and you're like, oh, this is a big group. It's tons of people. I'm going to make like an especially good campaign to play. The problem is you end up making a campaign that is way too long. So for Christmas,
oh God,
we had a bunch of people over. So it was from some of Ethan's friends, some of my friends, and they all were in a big campaign. And I was DMing it. Ethan was a player. And so I created this awesome Christmas campaign.
We fought for Frosty the Snowman.
The problem is, all they did was do basically one fight and some setup, because that's how slow it moved as a party. But I had set up like 3 arcs of plot that you didn't even get close to.
Weren't we gonna fight Halloween itself all around Santa's side?
Yeah, the plot was basically Halloween was invading Christmas Town, and you have to save Christmas. It's very classic.
Those bums.
But all they did was fight a corrupted Frosty the Snowman. That was the beginning. Like this town has some corruption in it, and some of the Christmas characters have been corrupted, and you need to kind of save them, and then you can talk with the elven guard and talk about how the war's going, and they need to go into enemy territory, encounter the Hansel and Gretel grandmother, and get there was an oven thing that you don't want to get put in the oven, blah blah blah, all this stuff. They didn't even get close. They just had one fight, and that's because of how slow it went.
Frosty.
So I was very disappointed, but it was definitely a learning experience.
Wait, so are Christmas elves D&D gnomes or elves?
I think they're gnomes.
They are gnomes. They're Christmas gnomes. Change my
But yes, so when you're planning your story, make sure you plan a story that is capable of moving way quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Way quicker. There should be very little anything.
Very little thingy.
It should arc. It should begin, middle, end in the time it takes for at least half of another campaign. If that makes sense. Half as fast.
Yep.
Or twice as fast. Okay. Continuing story. It is kind of nice because you don't have to prep as much. All you got to do is make sure it moves quickly. And your players will fill up that time with them talking. Trust me, they will. Good God. And just turns. Any combat. Oh, don't even get me started. I would avoid combat, actually.
The players, actually, I'll give a tip for the players. You should just do your turn while someone else is doing their turn. Already just, roll your damage. Or, you roll if you hit or not. And you say, DM, I rolled a 12 and a 16. Do I hit in any of them?
Yeah. And
if you say you hit for the 16, you just said, hey, I did 12 damage.
Yeah, boom. I mean, make it a little more cinematic. But yes. And so think about that. Think about you DMing that. That's ideal, but you have to be ready to go as the DM because they're going to be telling you stuff, and then you have to be playing as the monsters, and so you got to really be prepared. But it's not as much. You just have to have your story, simple story, and have it very well prepped. That's what you got to do. Okay, so then one more thing about what story you're making. So let's say you're going to be playing with 7 characters or players for a whole campaign, Critical Role style. So Critical Role is obviously insanely good at what they do.
Ugh.
But so for the general person, I would say, if you're not Matt Mercer, I would say focus on the plot more. And actually Matt Mercer does do this. Focus on the plot more than on the character's backstory. So weaving in the character's backstory into the plot is an art, and it is done insanely well with Critical Role. But you probably should just focus on the plot. And there's nothing wrong with this. If you have a bunch of players, they should understand that there's too many backstories to fit sometimes. Now, you can totally use subplots using their backstories. But when you're prepping your entire campaign, focus on just your own story, and whether the players are who they are or not, the story will still work. And that's kind of how you want to do it. And that's the opposite when you only have one player, right? Because they only got one backstory, you might as well use it. So, yeah. And that's about all I got. I guess the last thing I would say is splitting the party isn't really a bad idea. You just want to make sure it's evenly split. If you have like one or two people go on their own, that's just wasting everyone's time. Never do that. But if you have like it completely split even, like 4 and 4 or 3 and 3 or 4 and 3, then it's like, okay, this is manageable now. You know what I mean? Like you both could maybe like fight something or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.